I Make Movies is the basics of video storytelling. I'm very excited to be teaching it. It's part one of a two-part series. The second part deals with the making of a short film using iPhones or iPad. And if you don't have those, you can also use Androids. There's similar kinds of software that you could use based on what I'd be teaching for the iPhone. But this today is what you need to do before you even pick up the instruments to start to go in and shoot something. You want to be able to tell your story, and this is the scripting process. And scripting is storytelling. That's really what it comes down to. And there's a particular way of writing for the screen, writing for putting together a video or a film, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. Because storytelling for video is storytelling. It's what we do, but it's particular in terms of video. So let's see if this works. Okay, so when we talk about story here, again, we're talking about story as story to be told visually, and not in a a static way like a photograph or a painting or anything like that, but in the moving image way, something that's unique. Film is a unique medium. Story is the dominant force in the world. It is how humans communicate. We read news stories. We look. My grandmother used to look at her stories on TV, which were soap operas and things like that. So story is how we communicate, and that goes all the way back to when we lived in caves and we had fire and everybody stood around, and the daily hunt was told as a story. The life as they knew it was told as a story. That's what we do. So to understand how stories are constructed, how we do that is what this is all about. Film and video is the dominant medium of the world. It just is, and even more so now because of COVID. People are relying on video to tell their stories. And the other side of all this, for me, aside from just the storytelling aspect, is being literate in how film and video stories are created, because that allows us to read them better and to understand the information that we're getting, the stories that we're getting, and make our own minds up about them. That all said, writing for the screen is a process that requires a couple of things. There's art involved in it, and there's craft involved in it, and they both come together in a way that they form and function. How they affect each other, and the script itself is a reflection of that. So what we're looking to do is tell a good story and tell it well, right? So a good story, is something that is worth telling, that the world wants to hear. And who decides that? Well, we decide that. The writer, the person who is going to tell that story, is the one who decides that the story has to be told. Something has to compel you to go through the enormous process of getting a story created, right? And then if you want that story told visually, and to bring it to the screen, it's not okay, look, it's not something that I want to tell you that I'm going to tell you that you can do it, and I'm going to make it, I'm going to clarify and demystify the process for you. But it's still, this part of it, this writing is a hard part to do. It's to tell a story well is something that you need to learn. And but what compels us to do that is when we feel there is something to say. So it's not if somebody else tells us that it's worth telling or anything else like that. That's got to come from inside. Love of story means that we love drama, truth, humanity, sensation, dreams, humor, language, duality, perfection, uniqueness, beauty, and love itself. These are the things that compel us, in our life, that have meaning for us. The word value is going to come up a lot, when we're telling stories. It's what we value in the world that we're going to write about, and that's where this all begins. And in order to tell that story, we're going to have to, draw from our experience in life. That's probably the strongest, most powerful tool that we have, or resource that we have, because it's the things that moved us, that created emotion in us. And that's what we want to elicit from an audience, is emotion. Right, that's the goal. That's the big prize here. That's the big, running around that Ferris wheel, get the gold ring. That's, you elicit emotion from someone. You did your job. So how do you know that? Well, you're going to have experienced that yourself, and so you're going to know that there is emotion there. Education is important too, right? We can get moved by things that we read or study or learn, and suddenly we're inspired because of somebody historically, or something in the news or something, and then that leads to us getting very captivated by it, and so we want to share, or we want to bring that to something that we experienced. And then there is self-knowledge, deep reflection on our life experience. I just finished writing a screenplay. It's my first in 10 years. I took a break because life was there, and I came upon some things that I never did before in my life, and I was moved to write a screenplay, something that took me 3 years to do, because it was a very, very deep dive for me. And, screenplays, narrative scripted screenplays, stories, fiction, take a long time. Documentaries are a different thing. Let me get into that in a second. But this is where we, also find our stories and tell them. And so, it's going to come from here somehow, right? And that's what we want to do, is figure out, how do we construct it? Now, I say we're natural storytellers, and we are, but, by the same token, some people, things get in the way of our storytelling, our natural ability. I have clips here that I want to show. This one I'm not going to show because it's full of expletives, but I'm going to tell you what happens in this scene. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the movie Adaptation, starring Nicolas Cage, but Brian Cox is in this film too, and he plays Bob McKee. And Bob McKee is one of the big film screenplay teachers running around the country, teaching to thousands of people screenwriting, and he's been doing it for 30 years. And I took the class for the first time in the mid 1990s in New York. I wound up working for him. And that's not him, that's Brian Cox. They asked Bob McKee to play the part, and he wouldn't do it, but he blessed Brian Cox playing it, and he does a spot on thing. And this guy is all about story. The book he has, the book that he wrote about writing screenplays, doesn't have the word screenplay in it. It's called Story, and that's what he focuses on, telling a good story. And so in this particular scene, in this particular movie, Nicolas Cage is a screenwriter struggling, trying to write a story about, he's been hired by a Hollywood studio to write an adaptation of a book about orchids. There's nothing there, orchids, and he's struggling with it. And so his question he puts his hand up very meekly in the middle of this big audience of people, with this very brazen, monster on stage, bellowing, about screenplays and stories. And he says, what if a writer's attempting to create a story where nothing much happens? And McKee's answer, right? Brian Cox's McKee's answer is wonderful. And it's true. What he's saying is that, with a lot of expletives, it's impossible for nothing to happen. Every day something is happening in the world. And he goes through this whole great speech where, he's insisting to this poor, writer who's crumbling in front of him, that it's impossible for nothing to happen. Something is always happening. There is an event happening every day. And that's the key to take from this, is the word event, right? And I'm going to go into that. So just as we go into the next part of it here, this is what I talk about values, just to say, stories for the screen are unique. how we create them. Right, stories for in general, they have the same thing: a beginning, middle, and end. Where we want to get to a point, we want to blah blah. But for the screen, there's going to be a particular way that we're going to approach it, and we have to think that something is happening. Because that's where conflict happens. That's, and, we talk about events. I'm going to get into this in a little bit, but an event, a scene in a movie is called an event. Okay, so something happens, right? And in an event, in life, forget about it in a movie or calling it a scene in a script, whether it's documentary or narrative, just something changes, okay? And that change is a change in value, all right? So what we're looking at are value changes. We're looking at, the values that we're talking about here are positive, negatives, and, these aren't the only ones. These are just examples of them. But, values are what our stories are based on, and it's what we're writing about, values, and what we're trying to demonstrate. So, life and death, love and hate, freedom and slavery, truth and lies, loyalty, betrayal, excitement and boredom, wisdom, stupidity. These are just some examples, and you can come up with many, many more of, values and how they, there's a valence there, right? And how they go back and forth. And when we talk about an event, when there's a change, right? Well, somebody winds up on this side. If there's two competing forces, one force winds up on this side and one on this side. Sometimes, love is going to be winning. Sometimes hate is going to be winning. Sometimes truth is going to be winning. Sometimes lies are going to be winning. And that's how you're maneuvering through your story, right? Okay. So we have people to do that for us. They're called the characters in our story. They're the protagonists in our story, right? So a story event creates not just change, all right? Meaningful change. This is a story event, right? As opposed to just an event in the world. You go out and, randomly, two cars collide or something like that. Nobody gets hurt, but it's a bumper, fender bender. That's an event. Is it meaningful? I don't know. But in a story, if we're creating that event, it's purposeful. All right? Nothing just happens for no reason. We put it in there because it has a reason, because it is moving our story along. Story event creates meaningful change. Change is what we are looking for. Change is what we are communicating. Change is what we are expressing. Change is how we're going to get that emotion from people, okay? Because in that change, that's how people are going to go, wait, I didn't expect that to happen, or I don't want that to happen, or I want this to happen instead, or, it's how we get people involved in our story. So a story event creates meaningful change in the life situation of a character that we are identifying with. In this particular case, this is Dorothy, right? She is our protagonist that we follow through The Wizard of Oz. We see the story through Dorothy's eyes. We experience the story through Dorothy, all right? So anything that happens to Dorothy happens to us, right? So a story event creates meaningful change in the life situation of a character. Change is expressed and experienced in terms of a value, and it's achieved through conflict. That's that word I mentioned before, conflict. Something has to happen. There's conflict going on. So change is expressed, there you go. Okay, very simply, in The Wizard of Oz, a very big, meaningful event happens that takes Dorothy out of black and white Kansas and throws her into full Technicolor Oz, right? And that event is a tornado. The reason why that tornado does that to her is because of all of the events that led up to that, one after the other. And her trying to get into the storm cellar, and she can't, and so she goes in the house and uproots and flies through the air, and she sees everybody going through past the window, and she lands, and she comes out, and she opens it up, and she's in Oz, or Munchkin Land, right? And that is a huge life change for her, because now she is about to experience the great adventure that she secretly was yearning for, or was yearning for when she sang Over the Rainbow, right? So the writers created all of the events that happened up to that point to get Dorothy to the point where she was not where she needed to be, right? Or was where she needed to be in order to wind up in Oz. It starts off with Elmira Gulch and, trying to take Toto away from her, and her grabbing Toto and running away because nobody's paying attention to her or listening to her or believing her, and her going to see the guy with the crystal ball, the guy who becomes the wizard later, who's the runaround guy with the, who tells her, puts the little picture of Auntie Em behind it that says she's calling you to go home, right? And he gets her to go home. All of these things are events where somebody's making a choice, right? Dorothy's making choices. Oh, I've got to go back to Anna. And oh, she's breaking heartbreak. I can't do that. I've got to go back. This girl loves. This is what this girl is all about. Love. All of her choices are made on love, right? Love of Toto, love of Auntie Em, love of the Scarecrow, love of everyone, okay? And it brings her to, the ultimate scene in the movie, which we'll look at a little bit later. Good so far? Okay, good. So now we're talking about, an event, a meaningful event. A scene, scene story is a meaningful event. So this is how we build through, and I'm using narrative screenwriting here, not scripted screenplay writing, because it's the easiest way to approach it, but it works the same in documentary, and I'm going to talk about that at the end too. I'll make the, analogy to that, particularly in terms of how we actually go to the script, and we'll look at the scripting. Because I would imagine that, anyone doing something for a school level, or for a classroom was going to be doing something more documentary, but that's not necessarily so. We could find a way to, do things narratively as well too. Anyway, a scene is defined as an action through conflict. There is that word again, conflict, okay? An action through conflict. It happens in more or less continuous time and space, right? More or less, meaning, generally speaking, like in a play, we'll watch something on stage and playwright tries to get everything in one, scene setting so it doesn't move around. In a movie, a scene can take place starting in a bedroom, walk into the kitchen, go into the garage, get into the car, and finish when you get to the 7-Eleven, right? It can take you through this whole big thing. It moves out into the world, but it is still more or less continuous time and space, right? It turns at least one value in a character's life to a significant degree, okay? Every scene is a story event. So let's go back to that other one. That turns at least one value in a character's life to a significant degree. I just talked about something starting in, the bedroom, going to the kitchen, going to the garage, into the car, and then, to the 7-Eleven or whatever. Let's just say that we have a couple that wake up in the morning, right, in bed. And this is what we first see. This is how we wake up. This is how we enter the scene. And he reaches over to her and, starts to initiate, and then she, kind of answers back, yes, this and that. They're having kind of a cuddling moment. And then suddenly she gets up and goes, starts to get ready. And he's like feeling a little bit miffed, and, now we don't know who they are or what's going on, or maybe we do, or whatever. We follow them through something else, maybe something underneath, but, the subtext is something, and he's upset. And so he gets up, and now he's not doing too well, because he really just wanted to hang out today, and she obviously has a purpose. So he starts to get ready too, but now there's some tension between them, and, they have a little dialogue. They're going to the kitchen, or, if they, this is carried through the tension, now carries through into the kitchen pouring, and he says something, stupid or whatever, and then she's like, huh, what? And then she gets mad at him, and now the tension rises, now it's like gone from, they were just kissing a little bit ago, you know what I mean, to now they're snipping at each other. And then, he gets in the car and she follows him because, they're both driving to go someplace. And, he says, well, this is like this with you all the time, and blah, blah, blah. And now it's turned into a big thing. And so they're starting to get into an argument here, and they're fighting. And then finally it turns up with, she says, pull over, and she says, I'm leaving, get out of the car. And she goes, or he does that, somebody. But something big has changed. And it started out innocuous. We don't know. Maybe we're going to learn about it later, what was going on with them or why they got to this point, or maybe we learned about it and this is the culmination of it. But ultimately, and I'm just giving you an example, you know, I mean, there's millions of examples, but something significant has changed in these characters' lives, right? Because they've gone from a really good, happy, wake up morning moment to basically breaking up, you know, in front of the 7-Eleven, you know? So, that is a story event, and the value that's changed is love here. You know, I mean, love turned into anger, hate. You know, in a very short, continuous amount of time and space. That's a scene. So a beat, if we look at what we just were talking about, a beat is breaking up a scene into little beats. Okay, a beat is an exchange of behavior, right? Action and reaction. So we saw a lot of that going on in the scene. Beat by beat, you know, these changing behaviors shape and turn the scene and a value in a character's life. So just go back and look, and we had, you know, he wakes up and, you know, he kisses her and she kisses him back, and then they're having a, you know, nice cuddly moment, but then suddenly she says, I've got to go, and she goes and he doesn't take it well, and that's, you know, whatever reason why that was. These are the beats, these are the reactions: action, reaction, action, reaction. Okay, and that is what, you know, builds and builds and builds until somebody, like, he says something really stupid. He doesn't have to say that stupid thing. He could decide not to, but he doesn't. He says it for whatever reason. He does, right? Says the thing that now elevates it into more than just, you know, snipping. Now they're fighting with each other, and it's getting to a dangerous level, right? Love is, you know, wavering here, because really, what is love? Love is the decision maybe not to say that stupid thing or take it there, or maybe frustration and anger brings us to that point. A character making a choice, right, is what a story turns on. We'll get to that in a second. The value changes here, right, for these people. That makes sense? Is that good? Okay, all right. So a sequence is when we take several scenes and build them together into something that changes on a larger scale. A sequence is a series of scenes. In a feature film, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, 90 minutes, whatever it is, you know, there would be like 2 to 5 sequences of, you know, of scenes, you know. In a short, you know, it's just one, because that's what a short is. So, you know, there's like 2 or 3 scenes per sequence, and, you know, several scenes per, you know, in a feature, sequences. And these do the same thing that a scene does. They culminate in something larger. So a larger event is happening at that point. The conflict is rising. We have what's called rising action, all right? And the conflict is getting more intense between the characters. Now, I was talking about a story that seemed to involve 2 lovers, but we mostly will be talking about here is protagonist and antagonist. The force of protagonism is the hero of the story, and the antagonist is the villain, generally speaking. The antagonistic force could be anything on any level. It could be a person, it could be, you know, society, it could be, you know, a tornado, it could be anything, but we'll get to that. So these sequences just build then into what's called an act, okay? And usually we work in what's called a 3-act structure. If we're talking, you know, a feature, but even in a smaller piece, something shorter, we're still always thinking about 3 movements. The introductory movement, okay? That first act, which is when we introduce the story, right? Or the character and the conflict and what's going on. The second act, where we complicate it, right? And the third act, where we resolve it. Okay, so there's always 3 acts. In a feature, an act is a series of sequences. Acts peak in a climactic scene, right? And this climactic scene causes a major reversal of values. Okay, so everything gets just bigger and more intense as we go along. You're building on, right? Not just stringing out a series of events. And this reversal is more powerful than any previous scene. That's what I mean by we're building upon things. And then an act, just to finish that all up, the 3 acts together, the story is a series of acts built to a last climax, that crisis climax resolution, bringing about the final absolute and irreversible change in that story. That's the point that we're getting to. That's where the meaning will be derived. That's where we have brought out the emotion in the audience, we hope. So just to reiterate there, that's basically what we call story structure, okay? And structure is structure and story are synonymous, okay? You cannot have a story without having the structure of a story, and you cannot have structure without, without story in terms of the story structure. I want to tell a story that this seems to be, lots of theory and things like that, but I met at a party once Julius Epstein. And Julius Epstein wrote Casablanca. He's one of the greatest screenplay writers. He and his brother Philip wrote Casablanca and many, many other stories. And I was brought to this party for the purpose of introducing him, and it was a surprise to me. I didn't know. I had done a favor for the guy who was throwing the party, and he said, "Come to my house on Friday night. You're going to be really happy." And I was a big fan of Casablanca. Bob McKee uses Casablanca in his seminar to teach the perfect screenplay story, right? So, and having worked for him, I sat through this seminar about 20 times, right, after paying for it myself. And so I come in, and my friend Harry ushers me across the room to this little old man sitting on the sofa, with his pants up to here, 90-something years old. And he's, says, Vinny Sassone, meet Julius Epstein, Vinny Sassone. And I was like, I was meeting the Pope, for me. And I sat down in front of him, and I said, "Mr. Epstein," I said, I'm a fan. I love your work. I've seen Casablanca a million times. The screenwriting class that I took, he uses it for as an example of the most perfect screenplay. And he stops me right there. He goes, "Screenwriting class?" I said, "Yes." I said, "Yeah, screenwriting class." He said, "Like what?" And I said, "Well, Bob McKee, and it's 3 days, and I took this course, and I learned all about how to write a screenplay from him." And he goes, "You 3 days screenplay, you paid for this?" And I said, "Yes." And he goes, "How much?" I said, $450. He goes, "You were robbed." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "That's not how you do it." He goes, "I'll teach you how to write a screenplay right here, right now." He said, "Act 1, get your guy up a tree. Act 2, throw rocks at him. Act 3, get your guy out of the tree." Okay, so for me that was a bit of a revelation, and it was for someone who had sat through a million screenwriting courses, classes, seminars, webinars, etc., to have this old man sit there who could write a screenplay in his sleep, to hear him boil it down to that, was amazing to me. What I'm just pointing out to you here, even though I go through a series of slides and say that, it's saying the same thing, okay? Really. Julius was just putting it down in a very simple way and being Julius, but this was, this is what we look at. This is the structure of storytelling. And then ultimately I talked about that meaning at the end. This is what is compelling you to begin with, right? Storytelling must have a purpose. There is some reason why we are taking people on whatever journey it is that we are taking them, right? So every beat, every scene, every sequence, every act, every line of dialogue builds to a climactic expression of that purpose. What is compelling you to tell this story, right? Why are you telling this story? Arthur Miller used to type what he called the controlling idea of his story, okay? It's what was making him write the story, and he would type it as one sentence, and he would scotch tape it to his typewriter, and he would read it. It would be right there in front of him. And unless every word that he wrote had something to do with that, he wouldn't include it. That was his reminder of why he was writing this story. What was his purpose in telling it? And it was reflected in every scene, in every beat, in every sequence, in every act of every play he wrote, of the play that he was writing. And he did this for every play that he wrote. So that is why it's important for us to understand why we're telling a story. So, and it's really hard to get through telling a story, you know? I mean, because there's a lot there. And that, trust me, that purpose, that drive, that desire, that, you know, bring that to the other side of the, you know, of that process is a huge endeavor. But when you get there, if you kept clear-eyed about why you're doing this, and that doesn't mean that you're not going to discover other things along the way. It is a visceral, alive process. It's an artistic process, just as much as there's craft. You're going to be, you know, discovering things yourself and incorporating that into the story. And you will be just as surprised at the ending more often than not as your audience will be, right? You have to be. There has to be some sort of spontaneity to it. But the one thing that's going to happen all the way through this story, the one thing that's going to be consistent all the way is conflict. And that's what you're going to be working to resolve at the end, right? And it's what your protagonist is going to do. Your protagonist is going to want to resolve that. And again, whether it's a scripted narrative or a documentary narrative, we're going to be following a story. It's going to be conflict, and we're going to resolve that conflict or not resolve it for a reason. There has to be a reason we're not resolving it. We're leaving a question mark at the end, or we're purposely leaving that story open because we want the audience to derive some meaning from it. And many, many, you know, examples of that. The conflict is something that we have to understand, and it is vital because it is the thing that is usually lacking from a story when it is not working. Conflict must be shown, not told or explained. Mention that we're talking about a very particular kind of storytelling here. This is not storytelling for, you know, in the novel. This is not storytelling on a stage. This is not storytelling in terms of a song. It's not a painting. It is a motion picture. Thousands and thousands and thousands of moving images that accumulate into this, you know, demonstration of life, right? But of life events, of life change, of life values changing. And in that, the way the values change is through conflict. Conflict between characters, conflict between a protagonist essentially and an antagonistic, a force of antagonism, whether that's a person or a force of nature or a force of society or something, okay? But this is a visual story. We are telling it for the screen. So it must be shown, not told or explained. In a book, right? Okay? In a book, you can get into a character's head. You can understand what that character is thinking. An author can help us understand the thought process of a character. We can't do that in a film. You can't put the camera right up to somebody's forehead, right, and go inside and understand what they're thinking. Actors have to act, right? There's subtext. We have to demonstrate what's going on somehow visually. All right, can't just be explained. It's not just two people talking around going, you know, well, I feel really bad, you know, because you know, it's not about that. It's about demonstrating, not about telling. Okay, and conflict must be dramatized. Dramatized means we have to set up events that force our characters to make choices, because it is in the choices that characters make. It's in the choices that we as people make, right, where we discover who we really are on the deepest level. Not that I like chocolate or vanilla, not that I put milk and sugar in my coffee, not that I drive too fast, right? But really serious, important choices that I make in my life, okay, that values change on. I'll give you an example. And this is conflict too, because it puts a character in conflict. Let's just say that there is a guy who, right, a character in our story, and he got busted for driving under the influence. Okay, and he's not supposed to be driving, but he had a bad night, bad week, whatever. Took the car out, went driving, went to a bar, drank all night, talked to his bartender friend, got back in the car and was going home. And now it's morning, right? Or whatever. He slept in the parking lot or whatever. He's going home and he's not supposed to be out. And there's a school bus, and the school bus, veers off the road and rolls off the road. And there's children in it and they're in danger. I know I'm creating a big event, but this is an event, right? This is something that's going to put our character, in a situation. And now he's faced with a choice. If he stops and he helps, he has to tell people, the cops, when they show up, that he wasn't supposed to be there and he's in big trouble. Or he can drive on and leave them there and, let somebody else show up and help them. The choice that character makes tells us who that person is. It drives the story. It makes a huge change in what happens next in that character's life, but it tells us who that person is. If he stops and he helps them, he's one person. If he drives on, he's another person, right? Different values are at stake there. So who created that situation? You did, the writer, the dramatist. You dramatized it. It's very dramatic, isn't it? It's a school bus flies off the road. Kids are in, lives are hanging in the balance. And so, yes, it's big, it's dramatic, and this guy has to make a choice there. Conflict must be resolved. Okay, somehow we have to resolve the conflict that we begin to create. So whatever we do, we are looking for our characters to resolve that conflict. We have another thing that happens in the story. It's called the inciting incident. It's that one thing that happens that sets off everything. It is what happens because the force of antagonism, the antagonist, decides that he or she needs something and wants something to happen, and the protagonist is in the way, and this event changes everything for that protagonist. It happens to Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, right? It's what sends her to Oz. Elmira Gulch takes Toto and is going to put him to sleep because he's a menace to society. That kicks everything off. That's why Dorothy takes Toto and runs away. That's why Dorothy winds up outside of the storm cellar when the tornadoes come in. And it's why Dorothy winds up in Oz. It's why everything happens after that. And it resolves itself in the penultimate scene of The Wizard of Oz, okay? We'll get to that in a second. Universality. Domestic conflict is the most universal type of conflict, okay? But conflict is, on the character level, inner. It's in relationships. It has moral implications, right? This is where, conflict, just an example I showed you before, with the guy stopping or not stopping, there's, moralities involved here. I want to make sure that I can get through. I'm just checking my time there. So the types of conflict that we have are personal, societal, cultural, and environmental. So they can work on all these different levels. And I think I mentioned that before. Violence may be involved, but violence isn't what we always think it is, okay? Violence is, emotional as well as physical, right? I mean, abuse can be verbal, and it's just as painful as any other kind of violence. It may not be present at all. Conflict changes people. The central problem must be important enough to bring change to the protagonist, right? So as we were talking before with that guy with the bus, this is something different. And as we're going to find out with Dorothy, change happens too. The protagonist has the will and the capacity. Dorothy is a willful girl. Dorothy knows what she wants. She doesn't think she does, but she really does. And she's constantly, got this one value, love, that guides her. She has the capacity to pursue what she wants, whether it's her conscious or, in her case, unconscious desire, right? To the end of the line. She doesn't stop. This girl doesn't give up. right? To the human limit established by setting and genre. And by what we mean by that is, obviously, this is a fantasy world of Oz. There's witches, there's magic, there's this and that. And it happens, okay, to Dorothy, but she prevails. A protagonist must be empathetic, but may not be sympathetic. Okay, so we love Dorothy. We can't not love her, but Dirty Harry and Charles Foster Kane are two examples of characters that we don't necessarily sympathize with. Dirty Harry is, you know, Clint Eastwood's character is a killer as bad as almost as the killer that he is pursuing. And Charles Foster Kane, you know, is he in it for himself or is he in it to really help people? We don't, you know, that's the whole point of the story. Why is he doing what he's doing? So we can empathize with them. We don't have to sympathize, we can empathize. And in stories of love, an audience identifies with deep character, with innate qualities revealed through choice under pressure. This is a movie where, you know, these two people who are in love, they spend one night together and they make a very difficult choice at the end of that movie, right? At the end of that story. This is Before Sunset, Before Sunrise, one of my favorite movies. And minimum conservative action. So people don't just blow things up when they don't have to. We take the minimum conservative action to get to the next point in our story. A character will always take that amount of action conservatively, you know, from his or her point of view. And there's the moral dimension of conflict. There's always a morality at stake here. And that value that we're talking about is how we, you know, define that morality. So documentary versus scripted. Okay, the principles of story are the same. The process of the storytelling is not. So we see here this, you know, interview going on. This is Ava DuVernay, and this is the movie 13th, about the 13th Amendment, and she's interviewing someone here. What happens in scripted, okay, is we write the script. It gets, you know, tight. You take it out in a certain amount of time. You shoot it with actors, and you know, then you go in and you edit. And you're done, okay? In a documentary, it's different. We're going to put together a script, and I'll show you what that looks like. And we go out and we shoot. And we get interview, we get B-roll, we get all this other stuff like that, and we come back to the editing room, and we start to sift through all of that footage. And we start to realize, I see, this is the story that I'm telling. And that requires us more often than not to go back out and get more footage, pursuing in a more focused way, right? And come back and add more, and maybe go do a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and a little bit more. So there's this in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out process in a documentary, because what we're doing is we're getting the actual footage and putting it together, and that's in the final part where we're telling. We may not even know who or what our story really is about when we set it out, but we have this desire to learn, to understand. So it comes out more like a, you know, in a way, like a journalistic approach to it, right? Following down the story, where you're constantly going through it, as opposed to scripted, where you're, you know, putting everything in the script first. Conflict must be resolved. No matter what, the conflict has to be resolved at the end. Does Ava DuVernay solve everything about, you know, racism at the end of her story? No, but it is an enormously compelling ending that gives us an idea of where we need to go next, or what we need to do. Conflict must bring the protagonist and the antagonist together. In this case, you know, the force of protagonism and the force of antagonism in her story, or in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy with the antagonist, right? An unhappy resolution is better than no resolution. So, and this is another documentary. This is Grey Gardens, and it's a wonderful documentary if you haven't seen it. It's basically kind of a slice of life direct cinema story. Okay, these are all different types of documentaries. Slice of life is just that, you know, looking in on people in their life. Ethnography, travelogue, this is where we learn about people in different places, or, you know, travelogues, they were popular in the early part of the 20th century. People, you know, when they first started seeing movies, were like, wow, Nanook of the North, Alaska, you know, that kind of a thing. Propaganda, Germany obviously used it, but propaganda, you know, could be described as what Ava DuVernay is doing with 13th, you know, getting a social, political point across. Direct cinema is when the camera just follows people around, like they do in this story here, with a purpose. There's a character that we're following, you know, characters that we're following. These are the characters that we're following in Grey Gardens. It's a mother and a daughter. And then there's the subjective first person, which is like a Michael Moore kind of a story where he's in it and he's going to rattle the cage of somebody in this particular story. So that is basically how we approach story. And, for the screen, whether it is for, whatever it is, everything is narrative, whether it's documentary or scripted. And this, just want to give you a quick idea of the software that you can use, which is very helpful. A lot of what we talked about already is artistic, but there's some craft involved with that too. I like to think of screenwriting, whether it is whichever way you're doing it is, you're an architect, you're creating the blueprint for the story that you're going to go out and tell using a camera. Okay, and actors or interview people, anything like that. So Celtx is a free software system, CELTX.com, and if you go online, you can get create an account, and it's free. There are others that are not. Final Draft, Movie Magic, there's a bunch of them, Scriptware, and you can pay $300, $400, $99, $199. Celtx, does its job. You're going to get a basic account, so you're not going to have bells and whistles. And I include this because it really is free. Okay, they'll tell you, that you have to pay this amount of money, but if you go all the way to the bottom, you could say, no, thanks. I just want to do it for free, continue for free. And if you do that, you're going to be able to find out that you have, some choices in there, right? You can do the narrative screenplay that I talked about before, or you can do what's called the multi-column AV. And this is what we're going to use for documentary, right? There's a lot of different things that you can, different types of script. If you want to write a play, it's in there too, right? If you want to do a game, VR, it's in there too. But you can see there's film and TV and multi-column AV. You can create projects in 4 different ways. In this class, we're using, for right now, what I'm going to talk about is multi-column AV for the documentary format. So you can give your project a name here. And this is what's going to come up when you're going to have a multi-project, a multi-AV story. Okay, so we've got video and audio, and then over here is where you can add some images if you want to, sort of a storyboard kind of a thing. But what we're doing here is we're simply saying, this is what I'm going to see, right? And this is what, I'm going to hear, right? And so whether if it's whatever images are, you're going to be using, whatever you think you're going to be shooting is what you put in this column. Whatever you put that's audio is going to be over here. So in this particular case, Vincent Sessonis and his husband Stephen Turley are busy in their small winery. They're punching down fermenting wine. Each using a wine punch tool, they submerge the caps of the fermenting grapes that they have. So we're getting an understanding about what these two guys are doing. And then there's voiceover or an interview that we've had with Vincent. This is how we start our mornings this time of year. My husband Steve and I bought the small vineyard in rural Monterey County a few years ago and started making wine. It was a dream we shared, and now it's real, like 6 a.m. real. So this is obviously voiceover, or it's pulled from an interview that was done with me or that I did. So, the idea being that you will be writing down in these columns, in the video column, everything you intend to go out and shoot and detailing it to whatever degree you can, and also the audio. And when you do that, you're going to be entering the video and audio in the proper columns. Celtx allows you to do, quite a bit of this. And you can also enter the runtime that you think it's going to be. This is going to give you an idea of how long your story is going to be. It's not necessarily going to wind up that way, but it just gives you an idea. This is how you're starting to modulate art and craft here, right? And use the scripting format to help express your story. And you can save this to a PDF. It just takes some playing with, right? And I'm happy to if anybody wants to see examples of these, I have many examples of them. My students have done them over the last 5 years at College of the Desert, a Who Am I story that they do for the introductory film class. And, you know, so some of them are magnificently detailed and written, and I'd be happy to, you know, just taking their names off of it, you know, share them with you, because I think, you know, this way. And likewise, you know, there is, you know, I can share screenplays as well too. This is what a scripted narrative, scripted screenplay looks like, right? And there's a whole formatting thing here, but basically it's a scene heading, it's action, and it's dialogue. And, you know, these are the essentials of a scripted screenplay. You see there a little bit further view out, but the formatting, this is industry standard formatting. 1 page of a scripted narrative screenplay properly formatted is about 1 minute, right? So Celtics really helps you walk through it. Everything is in there to help you. There's video tutorials. And all of this is really important, but, you know, in terms of the software is something you can learn. Software is something you can get through. Software is software, right? Yes, there's definitely some things you have to learn. But the key is, and the reason I ran through the software so quickly, because we're running out of time, but the most important aspect for you to understand is the storytelling aspect of it. Before you sit down with either documentary, screenwriting of format, AV, or scripted narrative, you need to spend a long time working on your story, right? It's called the development process. It is the first and most important part of the storytelling process for moving image storytelling. And you know, by the time you get to the point where you're going to go out and shoot, not everybody has the resources to go out and keep going out and keep going out and keep going out. Even if it's documentary and you're going to go get a bunch of stuff and come back and look at it and then we'll get some more, you really don't have the capacity to keep going out. You've got to, you know, tell your story. We all have a certain amount of time to get that done. Limited resources, time, money, everything, people. So you need to get your story down and make sure you have your story down and express it properly in a screenplay form or a multi-AV column form before you can even begin to go into what I'll take up in the next class, which is going out and shooting it. And that's not even going to start out with going out and shooting in the camera. That starts out with making sure you've got everything, all your ducks in a row developmentally, and now you're going to go into what's called the pre-production process, and that is a process that happens before you even go and shoot and edit. And so that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and say I had never seen this screenwriting software or that type of software, but it reminds me of Run of Show that I do for events where I'm like, it's going to be this much time and who's doing what and what material, you know what I mean, where it's all lined up literally minute by minute. So that's kind of interesting to see that for the first time. So I just want to, I think we just jumped in and I didn't properly introduce you, Vincent, but Vinny is a college instructor. He mentioned teaching at College of the Desert. He built their film program there over a period of 4 or 5 years. He's an artist in residence. I first met him after he had come from NYU at the Tisch School of the Arts and is also a filmmaker in his own right. So it's really a pleasure to have him here today. And you see his email address there at the bottom as well as mine. And he previewed that there's a second class, part 2, which moves on to shooting. And obviously we were a little sidetracked with our mishap back on November 5th. And so we went ahead with today. I'm glad a couple of people could join us, and then we'll tape this is recorded, I'll close caption it and make it available. So we have time to take questions, Andy or Phyllis, if you have any questions for us.
Yeah, so in your experience with script writing, do you typically, when you're teaching your students, like, is it kind of like draw from your own life and try to make it fantasy, or like how do you encourage your students to find the right story?
I think that my students seem to know what they want to write coming into it. You know, they're taking a screenwriting course, of what I have found, and they they come in with some predetermined ideas. What I do in the screenwriting course to make sure that we can cover what we need to do is I give them very strict limitations on what I will accept in terms of the story structurally. I want it to be 2 characters. If they need to bring in a 3rd character, they can. I want them to rely more on action, not dialogue. So rather than ask them to come from a certain genre or a certain, tell a certain kind of story, what I try to do is corral them using these other restrictions that I know are going to force them to do certain things or have to do certain things, right? Or tell certain kinds of stories. I actually welcome them coming in with things, I've had students, tell stories that are quite personal, quite fantastic. So in terms of the creative part of it, I don't want to squelch them, but I do find that, there are ways of limiting their creativity that sets them free. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's kind of the way I do approach it with them.
No, I think that's great. I would love to try something like this with my students. And I think just with those 2 rules about not dialogue heavy and only having 2 characters really kind of focuses on what they can show. Thank you.
I guarantee you they're going to come back with 4 characters and there's going to be lots of dialogue. So it's really interesting what students will come up with, though. I mean, and I'm amazed by it, and the stories that they're struggling to tell. Let's put it that way,
Right. Any other questions before we wrap up? All right. Well, feel free to email either one of us, and thank you for being here, everybody. Appreciate you, and hope to see you on the 14th for I Make Movies Part 2, which is going to go into depth around shooting. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Louisa.
Thank you so much. Such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.